Well, welcome to the second half of the worldview of the Meru African traditional religion. We're going to continue on with where we left off last time. This will be fairly short, and we're going to talk a little bit about reaching to the unreached people as we finish up in this lecture. Let me share the screen with you. Be sure I get this right here. All right, we left off there last time. Now we're moving into an example of a African traditional religion and culture. A lot of African uh, traditional religions have oral history that goes with them. Meru people have a very interesting one. They talk about the fact that originally, before they came to where they settled there on the east slopes of Mount Kenya, they were enslaved to the people of the red clothes, they were called. And a prophet arose among them and told the leaders of the red clothes to let the people go, but they refused. They said, if you can do some these signs, we'll let you go. And one of them was, you bring us an elephant that can produce white dung. And so the prophet leaves and comes back, and with an elephant, sure enough, it produces white dung. The tradition goes they had fed it chalk, and it produced white dung. Then they said, okay, the second one is that you have to grow a tree that's doesn't grow higher than the ground, which sounds really weird, but if you know how something about banana trees, you can dig them down in a hole and they plant them, and they'll grow. It can grow to the level of the ground. And so the tradition is they plant a banana tree like that. And then the last one was this third sign that said you have to build a rope that reaches all the way to heaven. Now the prophet said, now that is not possible. It can't be done. And so he just tells people to pack up and leave, and they leave, and they come to a body of water, and it's unclear where this body of water is, but uh, the prophet, the Mogwai, he parts the water so the people can go across on dry land, and they get their clan names from the time that their clan passed through the water. And so if it was early morning, they got the word for their clan was early morning, and night was night, that kind of thing. So very interesting story. Sounds a little familiar to the biblical Exodus if you think about it. But it was a story known all over the place, and studies had been done on it. A few studies had been done on it before we started looking at it. But we had always thought, some of the earlier studies had said that they had migrated from the west, from West Africa, and we thought based on their language and their traditional stories that it sounded like they came from more from North Africa. And later, some fellow Meru man working on his PhD on this particular subject wrote a book in which he also agreed with us that it looks like they came from the north, and in fact, there is a place in southern Egypt with the same name as the tribe, Meru. And so, very interesting what you learn about backgrounds, and it's part of their history. But this prophet, who was the prophet of the one god, Marungu, and so you learn a lot from that. Cultures and religions, they have rites of passage, which are common to all societies: birth, adulthood, marriage, death, and so in the mix of how they live in their culture, their religion is mixed with it. It's not your religion over here and your how you live over here. They're intermixed, and so they have ceremonies when a child's born. Usually, you wait a while because of the high birth death rate for babies. That is less so now. And they give the child a name, and usually it's related to an ancestor. Although depending on the area of the tribe It's like in the southern part of Meru, where you have what is called area of Chuka, and have some different traditions. And in fact, one of the leaders there that we taught, he became a Christian, was the leader of the church. He his name was Imbogo, which means water buffalo, and he was just a little guy. I mean, you wouldn't guess he should be named a water buffalo, but it's because last thing his mother saw before she gave birth was a water buffalo, and so he got the name Mbogo, and so it varies in different places. And they go through you go through from childhood to adulthood, but there are stages. Pre-circumcision is your childhood. After circumcision for both males and females, you migrate into adulthood. But from there, you can go into various age sets, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. Marriage is a big thing. It's that's what you really live for, to marry, have children, and family life is extremely important. And they do bride prices there, and in fact, the word for marriage, you can see down here, kogaraga means uh, to buy each other, and you know, so we can see that the woman is bought with, and traditionally it would have been cows and goats and stuff, but money is also common nowadays. Polygamy was practiced, and it was mainly practiced simply because there was more women born than men, and they didn't think any woman should be without a husband. It was the practical reason for that. And you had family unity, and you live in extended family situations where all the sons and their wives and kids would all live within the same thing. So it was a patrilocal type of situation where everything revolved around the father figure, the grandfather, and until he died, and then the oldest son would take the place of the head of the household. Death, there was the idea that when death came, it was, people die and they go and join the other ancestors. And these ancestors protect the current living ancestors, people on Earth. And it's part of a unified family system and even a clan system. So that's kind of a normal way of some of the Afro-traditional cultures and religions work. They do have a lot of social structure, and that varies. There are African people groups that have a king system, chief system. Others, like the Meru people, have a elder system where a group of elders rule. But the basic age set you have after childhood, you go to be circumcised, and you go into a certain group, and so you'll go through circumcision ceremony, which was a highly important important ceremony. And so, sorry, my phone ring. My phone is not ringing the whole time. Excuse me. All right, we'll just leave it and see if they leave a message. Sorry. Anyway, so you go through a circumcision group, and this group of people that go through this with you, they become some of your closest friends and supporters through life. And so they identify with each other their whole life. And of course, back then they lived in the same area for their whole life. These days, because of globalization and people moving to urban areas, some of that's breaking down. But after that, they become warriors for the men, and the women become of marriageable age. And so marriage is the thing everybody's looking for, and the warriors will start out, protecting the tribe traditionally, and now, of course, they don't have to do that because they get an actual government that takes care of that now. So that whole idea of a warrior, there was nothing that really replaced it, and so a lot of the young men didn't have what to do. But education came, and the ability to go to school longer and go to university has changed, and that's what they do now. And then marriage comes along, and then after they've been married and have children, they become a junior elder and then a senior elder. Now you have to remember that the lifespan of people in this part of the world for men is about 65, for women about 68 on average. And so you become a junior elder fairly young. And then if you're chosen because of your character to represent your particular clan, you can be a part of the Injuri Cheke, which is the ruling elders group. Age sets. This is, basically you can, you'll either be a child or you're going to be a warrior, or marriage for women. Then the new elder, and then you have a second level elder, and then a higher level elder. And it's at the higher elder levels that become level elders that they can become a member of the Jurian Cheke if they're selected. And then you have your clans. This is the families that are all from the same clan, and they have their own organization of elders who solve issues when there's disputes. You kind of can remember Moses when he had the children of Israel. He picked leaders over groups of people, 50s, hundreds, and so forth. And before they had the case came to Moses, that was the same thing. The lower elders, if it got bad enough, the jury in Czechia was the final say on it. But they also had areas for sacrifice, usually on high hills, like we talked about before, considered sacred place, and God's presence is often thought to be more present there. And offerings, usually something like a black goat or sheep, and that was because black is the color of sacredness. So this is a part of the physical realm and what's happening in the physical realm that we've been talking about when we talk about worldviews. All right. Here is a traditional circumciser, and there's the knives there that he uses in the ceremony. He has a hat here for decoration, which is made out of Calabas monkey. And nowadays that's illegal to do, happily, because use up all the monkeys. Here's a picture of a group when we were there in 1984. This was a group that was going in for circumcision, young men, usually ages 13 to 15, 16, somewhere in there. It kind of depended on several factors, schooling being one of them. Nowadays, a lot of them just go to hospitals and it'll be done there. And the traditional teaching that went on, religious teaching went on during this time. But for Christians, they would send Christian teachers to do the teaching instead of teaching the traditional, traditional religious thoughts and so forth. But now a lot of Christians just send their kids, the boys, to the hospitals. The female circumcision is still practiced to some degree. Christianity has kind of made a difference in that area of not making that necessary, although hard to change traditions, but it's getting there. All right, well, that's just some. We've talked about the spiritual dimension, and that was the physical dimension of the African traditional worldview. Now let's just talk a minute about missions, African unreached, and one of the things we got to keep in mind: Christianity is growing very rapidly in sub-Saharan Africa. And that means there's been over the years, there's been a lot of opportunities to teach there. It's been, people are very open to Christianity, and you can, oftentimes you're invited to teach in schools, and teach religious matters as well as other things. And it's a very open type of thing, but it's a fast growing part of the world, just like over here in this part, Latin America, it's growing very rapidly. This southern hemisphere is seeing a lot of growth in Christianity, where it's slowing down in the northern hemisphere up here. So the center of Christianity is kind of shifting here. All right, so if you just look at some statistics here, uh, the world's population, it's now just a little old here, but 7 billion plus. But 72% of the people are in Asia and Africa, the southern hemisphere. And if you look at Africa there, 60% of all the people groups are in Africa and Asia, 60%. So that tells you that there needs that focusing on this part of the world is important for sharing the gospel. And so you got 3,839 people's groups in Africa. They have the most people groups, so most languages. There are over 12,000 ethno-linguistic groups, and most of these are in Africa and Asia. So you can see here, that's the case. And that's, you got people learning their languages, so you have to have the Bible translated in those languages, and the Bible's been translated in a lot of them. There's still some of the smaller groups of people that still don't have Bibles in their language. One particular group is doing their best to provide Bibles in all those final languages. That's the Pioneer Bible Translators. Good group of people, and I've had a lot of interaction with them, and they're doing a great job at that. We have what's called the 1040 window. One of the ways of identifying this part of the world is that's one of the highest unreached areas here. Now, we've been talking about sub-Sahara Africa down here, but in reality, the area where we have the most people that are not being reached is in this, what we call 1040 window. And this is your latitude 10 to 40. And then you kind of box it off here. So it includes North Africa, Middle East, Asia, parts of Asia, kind of, Indonesia's kind of out of it, but it's in there to some degree, being closely related. But you can see the percent of unevangelized. If you look here, it's highly evangelized areas. And but as you get into this area, this dark red, 65 to 100% are unevangelized, haven't really been able to hear the gospel in any meaningful way in a lot of these countries that are dark red. The orange ones here are more, they've had more contact, and we can get into some of them, like India you can, but you can't go in just as a missionary or evangelist. You have to go in for other reasons, and share personally the gospel. But there are other areas that have had more opportunities, like parts of China here. There's a large movement of Christians working in China that a lot of Chinese are becoming Christians, and we don't hear about it. And we keep thinking of communist China, but really Christianity is growing. The problem is we don't know exactly how much. It's hard to get data in a closed country like that. But anyway, this 1040 window is where most of the unevangelized people live. And if you take a look here, this data here in the 1040 window, there's your 40 degrees north, 10 north here. And here's your Indonesia, your China, India, and things like this. This is indicating the number of missionaries working in there. And you can see in a lot of these greenish looking ones, there's very few missionaries, and compared to others, like in India and Indonesia and stuff like that. So, yeah, so it tells us there's still a lot of work to be done. So the term 1040 window describes that rectangular shaped geographical area 10 by 40 degrees north of the equator. So it includes 60 countries with more than 2 billion people. So about 1/3 of the world's population. The majority of them are unreached people. Less than 2%, meaning less than 2% are evangelical Christians. It's a home to the world's major non-Christian religions like Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism are the top ones. The poorest of the poor live within this window. And yet only 8% of the missionary personnel work in these areas. So it's a challenge, and it's because a lot of these are not open. It's hard to get in there, and missionaries do risk their lives working in some of these areas. So you have groups of people here. These are just pictures of various groups in these countries, like Iran here, and up here into Turkey, and here in Nigeria, and here in China. So, for example, the Brahmin of India, there's 55 million of them unreached. Burmese, Myanmar, 30 million, 48 million. India among the Chamar. Jat Muslims in Pakistan, 28 million. Han in China, 36 million. And Japanese, 122 million. Highly unreached groups of people. Here's a listing of other unreached groups here, and 34 million to 130 million. So it tells us that, of course, Christianity is a religion that tries to share its message with people. There's a lot of people today that still haven't had the opportunity to hear that message. For those of us members of the Church of Christ, which Faulkner, of course, is a school is a school related to the Churches of Christ. We, for example, have a growing population of members of the church in sub-Saharan Africa. Approximately 1,400,000, and that is actually bigger than has grown bigger than our membership in the U.S., which is last statistic I saw was 1,116,000 approximately. In a population of 300 million, the population in sub-Saharan Africa is 855 million, growing fairly fast compared to the U.S. But so if you look, you can see the trend down here for Christians in Africa going up. Over here, you can see the U.S., it's actually declining. And even 2018 had even further decline right here. So what we're experiencing, Church Christ is experiencing the same thing most of churches are experiencing in the U.S. We're losing a lot of people into secularism, and we will have a section in this course on secularism. So why emphasize sub-Saharan Africa missions? Mainly, God's giving a lot of growth there in sub-Saharan Africa, and so it's he's provided a fertile field for us to work in, and there's approximately 183 missionaries, as talking about Church of Christ, serving in Africa, in a population of 1.4 billion, 55 countries, 210 languages. So these days, there's a lot of different needs in Africa from what it was years ago when we didn't have a lot of churches at that time. And so we need to think in terms of what needs to be done. Now, we are having part of what's happening in Africa is we're getting more and more churches, and they are sending out their own evangelists and missionaries to different parts of Africa, and even on up into the Middle East. And so you have them sending out missionaries. I know a couple that Christian leaders in Kenya that were sent to South Sudan, in which they are working there now. And there's a fellow that works in the Middle East, and so we're hoping that this will become the force that will do a lot of the evangelism, because Americans are not welcome in a lot of places in the U.S. because of the conflicts that have been going on globally. And but Africans don't have that disadvantage. So they're still continuing to plant churches. Most of the churches now for Church of Christ being planted by the people in the various countries, and the missionaries there assist in the training of leaders. And and the church leaders do most of the church maturation now. There is a need for assistance for providing them training for various self-supporting trades, because it is still a lot of areas are extremely poor. They have a great need for higher education. A lot of places, like in Uganda, where I was recently, kids would graduate from high school, and still, even if you took every place that was available in all the universities in all of Uganda, there would still be 20,000 plus students who qualify but can't get in because there's no place for them to go. And so I was over there starting a new Christian university, and and this was a severe problem. And so we were had programs for students to go through at the university we started, and they'd come out and be evangelists, but with a college degree. And so we can do a lot of things to assist and partner with the mission outreach that's going on by the Africans themselves in the various countries and areas. And these will be the ones probably that will do more of the outreach in the world, worldwide in the future. And so that's just kind of a brief glimpse of Africa. And so I hope that was helpful to you. We'll get out of this, stop the sharing. And next one, we're going to do a very brief one on Native American traditional religion, and just spend a few minutes on that in the next video. Have a good day.